Welcome to AWN Table Talk. I'm Crystal Niehoff, and I'm joined today by my co-hosts Tracy Hargis and Wendy Baird-Packard, along with special guest Lauren Brown. Aloha, Lauren.
Viewers, do you have a question about searching for work as a military spouse? Begin posting them now, and we'll work to get them on the air. Or share with us about some of the struggles you've had in finding employment and how you've overcome it.
Did you know, according to military.com, spouse employment is one of the top areas of dissatisfaction for military spouses, and spouses feel a negative effect on their career due to the military.
When compared with civilian wives matched by age, education, race, and geographic location, military wives are less likely to work in a given year, work fewer weeks per year, and are less likely to work full-time.
Military wives also earn lower wages than matched civilians, wives whether salaried or hourly employees.
So today we're talking about some of the challenges military spouses face when job searching and some of the career opportunities that are available.
Lauren Brown joining us today to discuss her experience searching for meaningful employment as a military spouse. Go ahead and share a little bit.
Yes. So a few months ago, I was just talking to Crystal about some of the challenges that I've faced personally as a military spouse. And then we realized that this is just a common theme that we hear talking to military spouses. And so I think there are a lot of questions out there. There's a lot of kind of hearsay around searching for work as a military spouse. And so I'm looking forward to the opportunity to kind of share with you guys my experience and hopefully help some people along the way.
And you're going to talk a little bit about GS jobs, yes?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I just realized my phone was on, so I decided to turn that down after I said, have y'all silenced your phones? So, guilty. So anyway, let's hop straight into our subject and get started so that we can learn more. Lauren, first, would you share with us some of your experiences in searching for work?
Yes. So my husband is active duty. He's an officer in the Army, and we have been active duty for about 4 years, and this is our second duty station, and this is actually the second location that I've worked. And so a couple of things that I've faced in looking for work in new locations is just when people want to know when you are able to start, and you all know that's not an answer that we're always able to give. So sometimes timelines, which is something that's really simple, are really challenging, and knowing people want someone that can start right away oftentimes, and you don't necessarily know when you're going to be able to be there. Another thing is it's very difficult to share about yourself without sharing the fact that you're a military spouse. It plays this major role in our lives. And yet oftentimes people hear that, and what they hear is a temporary employee. Yeah. They know that military life means that you're only in a place for a few years. And so oftentimes the hiring process is such a big process for them to go through that they feel like if they spend all this effort and then they hire you and you're only there for 2 to 3 years, then it's kind of been a waste of their time. And so sometimes I find that they're not as willing to invest in you for a short-term employment experience. So I have worked as a contractor and I've worked as a GS civilian. I'm currently a GS civilian. Both of those experiences have been a little different, but both were great experiences and learning experiences for me. I've found that one of the biggest things that has kind of been a challenge for me has been just learning to be patient with the process and learning that you have to apply to a lot of jobs and you have to really stay on top of it. But then learning that the process on the other end moves slowly. And so you may apply for 50 jobs in a month, and you may hear back from 40 of them 4 months down the road. And so just learning that, especially when it comes to federal jobs, be it contracts or DoD civilian jobs, GS jobs, that process moves slowly for several reasons. And so learning that in a civilian job, you may hear back within a week if you're a qualified applicant, but for a DoD civilian job or even for a government contract, it can be months before kind of the process catches up with your application for you to hear anything. And so try not to get discouraged in that in between time.
I just had a spouse that I've worked with in the past, and she just went for her second interview for a government job, a GS job, those jobs you find out on USA Jobs. And the second interview went really well. And they said, thanks so much. You're a great candidate. We'll see you in about 3-4 months. We'll catch up with you, which is exactly what Lauren just said. So the next step was going to take 3 or 4 months for that processing. So they really liked her. But in order to do all the background check and all the paperwork and everything, it was 3 to 4 months, and it's government bureaucracy. So it moves super slow. So you're right on when you said you have to be really patient about that.
Yeah,
it's very frustrating. 3 to 4 months before she even got to the next interview. That wasn't when she started. On average, it's going to take about a year to get through that GS process.
And really, when you're a military spouse, that is an eternity, because that cuts into a good portion of our time there, maybe 25% of our time that if we're at a duty station for 2 years, that's cut into our time. We've already wasted part of that time. So that sparks another question then. Yes. But first, I want to remind our viewers, if you have a question for Lauren about job search, especially with government jobs, federal jobs, go ahead and post them for Lauren now, and we'll work to get them on the air. And give us a shout out and let us know where you're watching from. It is always so fun. We're in Hawaii right now, although several of us will be PCSing soon. But tell us where you're currently watching us from. We love it when you give us a shout out, and we'll try to read those too. It's fun. So, Danny says, hello, ladies. Hi, Danny. Feels like it's been a while since I've been able to catch you live. Well, we're so great. We're so thankful that you're on here. That's great. And she says, this is a lot of great info. Thanks again for all the hard work. So great job, ladies. Thank you, Lauren, for coming on. This is great. She's one of our top fans. So thank you for joining us. But Lauren was talking about and Wendy, we're talking about the time frame that it takes so long. So when we PCS frequently, what are some of the first steps that you take when you're PCSing to a new area? Maybe before or after? How can we plan ahead for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the first things that I always do anytime, oftentimes our husbands will come home with kind of a shorter list at least of places. And so I typically go, for a GS civilian job, you go, as Wendy mentioned, to usajobs.gov. And so I will go there and kind of begin to search to see what's available. There are also a lot of, especially government contract jobs get placed online on places like Indeed. So don't be afraid to look at other websites too. And obviously there are civilian jobs in most locations. And so I just begin to start looking for jobs, and usually, depending on how early we know, I will go ahead and start applying. But one of the biggest things to do is really to start preparing your resume. And so I think there's a lot of kind of old information about resumes out there too, depending on what you've heard. I know what I was taught in high school was very different than what I was taught in grad school. And so working to tailor your resume for the different jobs. And so it's no longer a world where you can have one resume for everything. And so making sure that you highlight strengths that are at the top of your resume, highlight strengths that are fitting to the specific job that you're applying to. Even writing a cover letter that explains to the employer why you're interested in that job and why your past experiences make you a strong fit for that job. So prepping my resume, you can go ahead and start doing places. For instance, I would start doing some things with ACS, working on my resume, working through spouse preference if you're interested in that and using that. So you can start that at one duty station before you arrive at the next one, and go ahead and start applying. And that way you're kind of one step ahead of things before you PCS to the next area. So going ahead and kind of thinking about that those things is really big.
Speaking of your cover letter, do you tailor that specifically for the job you're applying for, or do you kind of have a form, like a template that you use?
I guess I do kind of have a template, but I'm not really sure. It's just something that I've kind of developed over time. And so in my cover letter, I try to think about what are some things about me that the employer might want to know, that they might find out in an interview, but they may not know before an interview, that is not necessarily shown in my resume. So some things about my personality, maybe some of my interests, but then I also use that as an opportunity to tie and highlight some of my key experiences. So if you're applying for a position that, for instance, is a leadership position or a management position, highlighting how some of your past experiences have made you a strong leader, or even it's a chance, if you've had a gap in unemployment, it's a chance to talk through some of that things. And so it just kind of gives them a glimpse into you that's a little bit different and a little bit more personal than your resume, I would say. But I do try to tailor that even information to the job that I'm applying for.
That way they don't feel like, I think that's a great idea, because that way the employer doesn't feel like, oh, this is just another template, another form that someone's sending me. And I think they like to see, or at least I used to, as a former employer myself and then a current volunteer employer, I like to see that it's personalized, that they know about my company, that somebody took the time to address me personally and say, this is how I can help you, and maybe what's great about your company and how I'm a good fit.
Knowing a company's mission statement, not necessarily who they are, but why they do what they do, and putting that in your cover letter goes a long way.
Yeah, I was going to say, doing a little research on the company, that's a great point. So knowing well who you're applying for, and if you're applying for a federal job, so you're going to be working on an installation, even just knowing each installation has kind of its own personality, its own unique challenges. And so I know when I was moving and applying to jobs in Hawaii, knowing some of the challenges of being stationed or running an installation that's on an island versus an installation that's landlocked in the United States, and knowing some of the challenges that we deal with here is something that I know kind of helped me stand out. So the fact that I had kind of taken the time to care and notice what was important to my employer as well. So
a great example would be if you went to ACS, you could go to relocation. Relocation will give you a packet about that. In the Hawaiian packet, they went through Hawaiian language in the relo. So what she could do is, if she went to ACS, get that packet and then build her resume and then use some Hawaiian aloha or mahalos in her cover letters.
And the same would be like if you're going to Germany or Italy or good point. I love that. Kind of use their language, because each place kind of has its own unique language. And you're right. The packet that ACS gives is, I mean, thick. It's great information. Great information. So. And then I want to say real fast hello to Dana, who's watching from Roanoke, Illinois. So thank you for tuning in. So you had mentioned the spouse preference program.
Yes.
Do you use that, and what do you base your decision off of?
So I have actually not used the spouse preference program, and one of the reasons is my job is in a very small category called accepted service. And that means that what accepted service does is it kind of allows priority to be given to education and experience. And so there are a few select kind of highly specialized jobs in the military that fall in that category. However, if I was applying for competitive service, which is a word you'll hear, and most federal jobs are competitive service, I would absolutely use this spouse preference. And that's because it gives you priority placement. And so when you're interviewing and you're being scored, much like veterans preference, it gives you a few extra points in that interview, in that overall evaluation process to help you get the job. And I've did a little research because I've never used spouse's preference. So ACS can help you with that. And so there's more information about that online. I'm happy to share some links if you would like for me to.
And we can definitely do those. If you want to share those after we go off there, that would be awesome. So.
Yeah. So spouse's preference, I learned you can only use it one time at an installation unless the job that you're applying for is temporary. So if I take a job that's a permanent appointment, so basically saying I'm in the job until I'm fired or I leave, right? Then I can't quit the job and reuse my spouse's preference. But if I take a job, for instance, that's only a 1-year appointment, and then that appointment ends, then I can reuse spouse's preference. And so there are some specific forms you have to have in order. You'll have to have your spouse's orders. If you've been a previous federal employee, they'll want some documentation from that, but they can help you pull that all together to have your spouse's preference in order when you're applying for a job.
Oh, good information.
You would work with typically how it's going to work too is ACS. She's right on. You're going to go to ACS first, and then they'll direct you to an office called CPAC, CPAC, and that's the Civilian Personnel Office. It's their administration, and that's who you would set an appointment with. You have to have your federal resume in order as you go there. You can always build your federal resume on USA Jobs. There's a federal resume builder there. They don't want a civilian resume. You take a civilian resume to them, they're going to send you back. They want a federal resume, and that's different. And it's very important and a great point how Lauren said that you can only accept the position one time per duty station. You may not pick that job. They may pick the job. And if you decline the job that they have found for you, that's your one opportunity to use that spouse preference. So it's not like they'll bring you a job and you go, no, thank you. And they bring you another job and you say, no, thank you. If you do not accept the position that they've found for you that matches your qualifications, then that is your one time.
Okay,
that is how it works.
So
you want to know when you go, and even if you're not really sure, your links are going to be great. I know it. But start learning about series numbers. So every job has a series number. So your administration is going to be your 300 series, or your education and facilitation is 1715 series. Now they're going to look at your resume, and then they're going to give you documentation to sign at CPAC. And that's going to tell you need to find out what series you're in, because if you apply for a job out of series, your PPP, your spouse preference, may not apply. So if you are not registered under a particular series number and you apply for a job in that series, your PPP may not take you in to get you that job. So start learning about what series you would want to be in. So religious affairs may be in one series, and then admitted, whatever series you can get them to plug you into is what you want to know. That's very hard for people to understand. I learned that the hard way. I applied for a position. I was not in the series and I was not referred. I was doing the position as a volunteer, and I was still not referred because I was not in the correct series. So understand the series numbers.
Wow. I guess the key takeaway is to educate yourself. We've got to be proactive, like you said. You kind of recon the area before you go and start applying for jobs, and then to educate yourself with what's out there and kind of what it means for you personally, for your position that you're applying for, and the pros and cons of it. So good points.
And there's more great information on the Office of Personnel Management.
And
so you can find all the information about job series and how those are defined and categories within those job series as well.
Fantastic.
And so if you go to the Office of Personnel Management or OPM, you can search that online, and their website will come up, and you can spend days reading about all the different nuances of all these preference programs.
And you have to.
Yes.
You have to be educated for it to get into those systems. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's good to know. Maybe you could share that link or
yes, of course.
Whatever. We had a few others join us. Do you want to read some of them out?
Yes, Sharita from West Texas is watching. Hi, Sharita. And then there's a Cindy Klein. Hi, ladies. Hi, Lauren.
Hi, Cindy.
See you in a couple weeks.
Yes, I'll see you in March.
All right. And then Sharita said, interesting that you can only use MSP one time per installation. I didn't know that either.
Moving forward, you can, I think it's 30 days, and you might know, Lauren, when you can use, because you've done that research, you can start your PPP process in your next duty station. I think, look this up, I think it's 30 days.
I think
Is that right? I think so. I think it's 30 days. So you don't have to wait to get to your next duty station to start it. You can start then. But yeah.
And Bridget from Fisher House is watching us.
Hey, Bridget!
From last week.
Fantastic. Well, Lauren, you're currently working a government job. So
Yes.
how do you have a federal resume? How did you apply? Maybe go over some of the process with us.
Yes. So I do have a federal resume. I applied for this position, and I had the same job at a previous installation. Both of those I applied for at usajobs.gov. And my federal resume, I did not actually build on USA Jobs.
Perfectly fine.
And so you can do that. You can build it in a Word document. And I actually, having been on the other side of the hiring process, would recommend building your own and then saving it as a PDF. So when you build it in USA Jobs, that's a great place. So I started there because that helped me make sure that I had all of the key information that they want in a federal resume. But then having been on the other side, I know that that's meant that sometimes I receive 20-page resumes, and that is overwhelming when you're trying to hire someone, and it doesn't really help you narrow down the information. So I applied on USA Jobs, and then as I mentioned before, there is a bit of a wait. In both of my cases, it wasn't as long as I know some of my friends have experienced with the federal hiring process. But that's because the chaplain's offices that I work in are much smaller, and so they tend to have a much more focused effort on hiring someone when there's a position unfilled. But in a larger organization across a garrison or in the DoD, you may be looking at many hiring actions taking place at one time, and so it really just depends on their ability to really focus attention on that hiring action and move it through kind of the bureaucratic processes. So both times I was called in. The first job, I just had one interview. They had a smaller number of candidates. The second time required 2 interviews. And so those interviews, they contact you from the office that you're being hired from, and they will bring you in for an interview. And then after you interview, I know you mentioned your friend, you do not hear from the office that you're being hired from typically first. They have to wait on CPAC to contact you. And so you will hear from the civilian personnel office, and they will let you know. And that, again, that process can be 2 weeks. That process can be 3 to 4 months, just depending on the specialist that's working on your case and how long it takes them to get through that process. And then in any time that you're working on a job that is going to require any sort of security clearance or background check, say if you're working with children or in healthcare, I know they have to have those background checks, that extends the process. And so my first time, due to some of that background check process, my first time it took probably 4 months to get through that process. And you have to have that preliminary background check cleared before you're allowed to start work. And then once that is cleared, the process moves pretty quickly to get you started. And so then it just depends on getting that through the process first. So that's kind of my experience both times here. So, and then when I was moving here, even though I had the background check, there were just other processes at play. There was a hiring freeze that was in the mix of it. So again, that was kind of a 3 to 4 month process before I heard back for sure that I had been selected for the position. So
that's a good point. That's another thing that you have to deal with when you're working a government or what's the right terminology? Government, federal, both? Probably government is
Either,
the broadest, maybe?
Yeah, government or federal employment is probably, you'll hear people talk about DoD civilians, federal employment, what else? GS, contractors. So all of those are people that work for the federal government. So,
okay, so I'll use government for the sake of making it as broad as possible. So again, if you have any questions or give us a shout out and let us know where you're watching from, we love to do that. So, so are there education requirements for government jobs, and how do you, is that in the job listings on like USA.gov or USA.gov, whatever?
Yes.
USA Jobs, yeah.
Yeah. So when you go onto USA Jobs, a federal job listing can be a little bit difficult to interpret. I know the first time I applied, I submitted everything, and I looked at my husband and I said, I'm not even 100% sure I'm qualified for this job. So if you need help with that, you can reach out and ask more questions and have people, they'll kind of help you. Some of the classes ACS offers kind of help you learn how to interpret those job listings. But yes, so if you read carefully through a job listing on USA Jobs, it will let you know educational requirements. It will let you know any experience requirements. So because my job is more specialized, as I mentioned, it does require a master's degree, but that is, I would say, not super common. And so it really just depends on what level in the GS scale that you're at. It depends on the contract and what's required of the contract if you're applying for a contract job. So I would say just read carefully to make sure that you are meet the qualifications there. But then also, as you go through the application process and actually submitting an application on USA Jobs, 2 important notes is one, you can save your progress on an application. So if you start assembling an application in USA Jobs and you need to come back to it, you can save that without submitting it. So it does kind of stay there so you can pick up progress where you left off the next time. And then also, it will usually take you through kind of a questionnaire that revisits those qualifications and have you answer about your level of experience with each of those qualifications. And so that does kind of help you to kind of see where you're at in the qualification process. So it really depends on the job as far as education and experience requirements.
Awesome. And now with government jobs, is volunteer work, can you use volunteer work as experience qualification?
Yes, you can. It depends on, so you really, one of the big things about a federal resume and why they tend to be longer is they are more detailed. And so you don't assume that it's 2 people sitting in an office reading every resume in detail. A lot of it's on the computer. It also may, for instance, with my job, the first person that looks at my job is not someone that has any background in the field that I'm in. And so you have to assume that the person reading your resume doesn't actually fully understand the job that you're going to do. And so having to add those details into your federal resume, and I forgot the question.
And volunteer work.
And
how
volunteer
does that work into that?
Yeah, so you have to make the connection for them about volunteer work. And on a federal resume, you do include information like hours worked and pay that was received and those kinds of things. And so you do disclose that work was volunteer work, but including in your detail in that volunteer work, how that volunteer work shaped you for the position that you're applying for, or what skills you brought or gained in that volunteer work that apply directly to the job that they're looking for.
That's awesome. Wendy and I have many times encouraged you, if you're not currently working, or even if you're employed and you want to get a feel for a different type of position or broaden your skills, volunteering is such a great way to do that, because employers really like to see that you're giving yourself. So that is a great way to keep your job skills fresh when you're in between, or to broaden your skills. So volunteer work is awesome, and it's just a matter of phrasing it. And don't be afraid to say that was volunteer work, because they actually like to see that. I think even in the Army, and I'm not very good with this, but we encourage our soldiers to volunteer. Absolutely. So volunteering is not a less than thing, is to show that you're going above and beyond. So, so in the future, what challenges, Lauren, do you see for military spouses in obtaining meaningful employment, especially as we're more, we do things more online now, and so sometimes that's good, sometimes it's bad. We move a lot. We're kind of, what's some things that you're seeing and how that might change?
So I do think that we're going to continue to see just the challenges of knowing that you're moving every few years. And so I think that can be hard, especially when we talk about employment versus meaningful employment. And so I know for me, knowing that I only have 2 to 3 years and wanting to do something that matters and make an impact, but doing that getting that accomplished in a really short time and leaving a job better than I found it. And so it is hard sometimes to distinguish between taking a job and actually finding something that's meaningful. And I think that a lot of times spouses find themselves in this position where they just have to work. And so they end up having to take something that maybe wouldn't have been their first choice. And so I think that's a big challenge, and just learning to take the job for what it is. So my first job was a contract job that I applied for because it involved a few of my hobbies, photography and writing, but was nowhere in the realm of what I actually wanted to do. And so then on some days where that job was really hard, it was really hard for me to say, like, why am I here just collecting a paycheck? Like, this doesn't mean anything. But now in hindsight, I see how the relationships that I built have affected me today. The things that I learned about the Army, the things that I learned about contracting, the things that I learned about working with people have all been helpful for me today. And so I think just learning to make meaning out of employment is a challenge. But I do think there are always, we hear a lot about federal budgets and government shutdowns and those kinds of things. And those do present challenges as leadership changes and the DoD budget, the defense budget expands and then it contracts. And so jobs are there sometimes and then they're not there sometimes. And so I think that's a challenge. And then just in general, we're seeing where technology is taking away a lot of jobs. And so I think just finding jobs as the job marketplace changes so quickly with technology is going to be a challenge. And then I also think as one of the big challenges for military spouses that they face is having children and taking time off with children, because a lot of times it's not feasible when your other spouse, when the other parent can be deployed at a moment's notice or can spend months in the field in a year or months TDY traveling for work. And so it can be overwhelming to think about working and trying to be at times a single parent. And so I know that is a challenge. And then, so don't be afraid to talk about those challenges in a cover letter if you've had gaps in employment, because I think that that can be a really big challenge. And then I'm trying to think. The other challenge is that the Army or the military, I can only speak from the Army perspective because I'm an Army wife, but the Army doesn't expect oftentimes spouses to be employed. And so what I mean by that is oftentimes my job prohibits me from engaging with my husband's unit in the way that I would like, or from being able to participate. Even previously, we had challenges where they were going to be gone for a long time and they were having information meetings about how to make sure you're prepared for your spouse to be gone for that long. And those things, and all of those things were happening during the day while I was at work. And so also, I think hopefully the Army is going to learn and the military is going to learn how to engage. I think a lot of families are needing to have both spouses working. And so the Army is hopefully going to learn some about that. But I just find that that's even a challenge for me, is saying, okay, well, do I need to give up some of my work stuff so that I can understand what's going on with my husband and his unit, or so that I can be there to support him appropriately? And so I think a lot of the challenges are going to be spouses that feel torn between that military spouse life and pursuing their own career.
That is such a good point, because that is difficult, and hoping that moving into the future, and so many of us work now, that the military will find, okay, we have got to accommodate them. Maybe we need something in the day and then another informational meeting at night, or somehow, because many of us have to work. And so that is such a good point. And I love the other point you made. And Sharita has something. Did you want to read that?
Yeah, Sharita said, yes, there is certainly a trade-off for jobs. If you are a spouse that works, we can miss out on opportunity or pertinent information needed to support our husband. If we don't work, we might miss out on a professional contribution. It's a tough catch and probably goes by season.
So true.
Absolutely.
So true.
Yeah.
So has anybody else out there experienced that? We'd like to hear maybe what you've experienced. And another thing that you can do to be proactive in if you have an issue like that, every year Blue Star Families has the Blue Star Families annual survey. And no, they didn't pay me to do. They're a nonprofit, so I'm putting this out there because I really do believe in it so much. Make sure you're filling out that survey, because then Blue Star Families takes that to DC and expresses to our leaders the issues that military families are facing, such as spouses working, informational meetings during work hours and childcare and that type of thing. So they're our voice in DC. So make sure you fill out that survey. I believe there's another one coming up again, March timeframe. We'll be having them on our show. Crossing our fingers. We're in talks about that. So please make sure you fill out that survey and be honest, because your name isn't released to DC, so you can speak very freely about the struggles and challenges that your family is facing. And then the other thing that you said that I think you're so right about is the word meaningful employment. I think sometimes, myself included, mistake, we kind of think that as, oh, it's something maybe at our education level or a higher paying level or whatever. But we're resilient. That's one of the best qualities of being a military spouse, is we're resilient. And so we're good at taking a bad situation, maybe, or a less than great situation and making it work, PCSing, deployments, all the fun that the military throws at us. So this is another opportunity. Maybe you're going in somewhere and you have a position that isn't quite paying well, or doesn't feel like you're, making as much of an impact or a difference as you'd like. Find ways, even if it's encouraging your co-workers, or finding other ways to give, volunteering, like you said, outside of that as well. We can all make a difference somehow. So it's finding that way and blooming where you're planted, as my husband would say, and we hear so often, and making the best of it until something better comes along. Just know that eventually something better will come along. So having faith. So in closing, what advice would you give? You've given a lot of great advice. Thank you so much. This has been awesome. But what, in closing, advice would you give to military spouses who are searching for work or will be doing that in the near future? Is what can we do to really maybe be proactive? What advice would you give?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. One, several we've already touched on, so I'm really just recapping here, but volunteering is a huge way. I think if you are not quite ready to go back to work full-time or even part-time, finding some ways that you can volunteer, and not just volunteering randomly, but being particular about where you volunteer. So think about what the job is that you may want to do in the future. And, if it's something with money, find a place with your FRG or in the chapel where you can get some experience working with handling money. Or if it's working with children, think about places where, whether it's, again, the chapel or sports or at a school, how you can build experience working with children. So think about what it is that you want to do, and then plug in with specific volunteer experiences, and take on responsibility as you become comfortable in those volunteer experiences, because that will help kind of bridge that gap if you've had a gap of unemployment.
And to piggyback on that real fast, Army Wife Network is powered entirely by volunteers, and I have many times given references to companies and contractors and such for my volunteers. So they really do reach out to verify your volunteer experience and to get a reference. So we can't stress enough how important and how meaningful that is in keeping your resume fresh. So
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I would say going to ACS, and I had a book that I was looking for, but I think I must have given it to someone else. But they have several books on applying for a federal job, building your federal resume. And so go now if you think you're interested, because jobs often pop up only for a week or two, and you have to apply in that time frame. So going ahead and having your resume ready and thinking through what jobs it is that you want to look for. Also, even if there are not jobs open on your installation, you can look on other installations to see what kinds of jobs. So oftentimes, although the numbers of jobs available and those kinds of things may differ, the types of jobs available are often consistent from installation to installation. And so you can look more broadly just to see what's out there and what might interest you. So go ahead and think through what it is that you're interested in and start building your resume to those types of jobs. And go take one of the ACS classes or work with one of their career counselors to help get your resume set how you want it to be, so that you can be ready for that. I'm trying to think of what else.
And I think we had some comments come in.
Yeah, we had a comment from Rebecca, and she said, first degree useless with moving every 2 years. Went to school again and was 1 year away from graduating with the BSN nursing, and then 9/11 hit. Multiple deployments and moves made it impossible. Tried to finish, but 10 years after, all science credits as well as maths and prerequisites must be started over. Held several small jobs and 2 military contracts as a contractor for chapels. She said, my resume looks crazy.
Oh,
There's a way to help you with that resume, though. There's a resume called a functional resume. And if you jump out there online, you can see what a functional resume looks like. It's skill built only, so you don't put any dates on it. So that gap of employment or lots of things, you can just highlight your skills. So you're going to have leadership, you're going to have team building, you're going to have some really nice soft skills that are transferable that you put out. Again, look for the format out there for a functional resume. Again, ACS will teach you also how to build that. But when you have all these gaps and holes and changes, the functional is the way to go for a spouse, for sure.
Yeah. And for more information on resumes, we did do a TableTalk series a few months ago. So look through our videos on Facebook and you'll see the Milspouse series where Wendy, who does this for a living, help resumes and such, gives us some tips on building our resume, keeping it fresh, making connections. So check those out. And then Lauren, did you have any other advice or recap that you would like to share?
The biggest thing I would say is just don't get discouraged. Just keep trying, because there is something out there. Look on post, look off post, but just hang in there and keep trying, because there's something out there, and you never know. And if you do have to take a job because you need to help support your family and it's not your dream job, like you said, just look for the friendships, look for what it teaches you about leadership, about teamwork, about those kinds of things, and find joy in those things while you're in that position. But patience, and just hang in there and find other ways to keep yourself engaged and to build those skills in the meantime. So.
What a perfect way to end that.
I have a really odd question.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's funny. Not funny, but so when these government shutdowns and everything go on, do you have to worry about getting paid or not? Or is it only certain places that only don't get paid, or what?
Yes. So you're not the only person that's asked that. So I have been affected by a government shutdown previously. The most recent shutdown did not affect us because the Department of Defense had a budget passed earlier this year. And so because of the partial shutdown, primarily Coast Guard was the only really aspect of the military that was affected. But previously, I have had positions, and it always happens when I'm traveling, which makes it even more chaotic when you're traveling for work. But yes, so they do kind of let you know there are certain positions that are essential, and they'll continue to bring you into work. And then there are other positions where they will send you home. And so you do have kind of some of that uncertainty there. And then also, depending on your job, my job deals with some budget management as well. And so it's not just my job that is affected by those things, but then also my ability to do my job, to budget appropriately for our programs and those kinds of things are affected. And so that does affect it. It just depends on like I said, the type of government shutdown that is taking place.
Wow, that was insightful. I'm glad you thought of that question. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, we hope that this has been insightful for you as well. I know I've learned a lot today. Lauren, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's a great opportunity.
We're excited you could come on and share your experiences with us. That is all the time that we have for today. Did you find this interview with Lauren helpful? Please like and share this video with your friends and your family.
Then be sure to join us for our next live AWN Table Talk on Friday, February 15th at 2:30 Eastern and 1:30 Central Time, when we'll be talking about all things PCSing.
In the meantime, are you PCSing this summer? Did you know that you can do a virtual recon of your next duty station from the comfort of your home with our Post with the Most series? Each Post with the Most is jam-packed with great resources, helpful links, even area school information, and that all-important hair salon recommendations written by Army spouses who've been there. That's one of the first things I look for. We've got nearly every Army installation covered around the globe, and we're adding more and more and more. So we've got more in the works. I've seen them scheduled to post. So check out our Post with the Most series on ArmyWifeNetwork.com.
With so many ways to be informed and stay connected, we really are your interactive empowerment for Army wives by Army wives. Thanks for watching.
Have a great weekend.